Hi, it's Rabbi Josh Rose, and I want to share some thoughts about the Torah portion of Toldot, which is the story of Jacob and Esau. I actually want to start this teaching by reflecting on Jacob and Esau's grandfather, that is Abraham. Now, Abraham is a very different person than Jacob is, and we'll get to Jacob in a moment. But Abraham has this intense desire to find God's presence in the universe, just to discover that presence in the universe. And that makes him a radical. That makes him a person who's constantly defying social convention in search of God's awesome presence in the universe. And Avraham is the person among the Jewish people who first tuned in to God's divine presence and plan for the Jewish people. And that's why the idea of the Jewish people really begins with Avraham and with the covenant that he makes with God. But Avraham is willing to break through all kinds of falseness in order to discover God's presence in the world. There's a sort of purity in Avraham, a deep, deep, deep desire to focus singularly on God's divinity within the world and to discover that in the most intense and powerful ways. And that's how the Jewish mystical tradition views Avraham, as being associated with the spiritual force that's constantly branching out, searching and longing for God's divine presence in the world, and willing to let go of and to surrender all boundaries and conventions and norms in order to discover God's presence in the world. That's Abraham's immense spiritual power. I want to talk about his grandson, Yaakov. And Jacob represents a very, very different kind of spiritual reality. If Avraham represents this power of constantly breaking through things to discover God's presence in a world that's humming with divinity, and finding access to that, Jacob, I think, represents a different force, which is finding how to take God's vision for the world and make it a reality. How to sort of shift the world around, how to thoughtfully plan and move the world around us in such a way that God's vision for the world can come to fruition. So if we view Avraham in a kind of reductive way as this source of inspiration and channeling God's power and energy, Jacob becomes a person who takes that inspiration and implements it and plans it. And so that's why we find in this story this person who is engaged with his mother, Rivka, to scheme in such a way that the blessing that is supposed to go to the firstborn Esav, to Esau, actually comes into Jacob when he appears to deceive his father Isaac at the bedside. Isaac believes that he's giving a blessing to Esau, but in fact it is Jacob dressed up as Esau. And drawing on a teaching of Akiva Zornberg and her thinking about this Torah portion, parenthetically, this is an amazing Torah teacher, Aviva Zornberg. She has a very powerful book on Genesis, and a very powerful book on Exodus, and I'm drawing on her reading of the Torah portion. She says that what appears to be on the surface level simply an act of deceit when Jacob puts on the animal skin on his arm so he can pretend to be Esau, who's very hairy. She says what that really represents is a very, very deep interpersonal transformation, a transformation that Jacob must undergo in order to effectively become Esau, existentially speaking, so he can transcend the own limitations of his birth as the secondborn, so he can inherit the blessing of the firstborn and actualize the work that he has been tasked to do in the world. And so he represents, I think in the most limited sense, he represents a kind of ambition, but on the deeper sense, he represents a very spiritual ambition, a challenge to take the world that we have, to take what we've been given as individuals, whatever life has dealt out to us, no matter where we fall in our families or whatever our abilities are as thinkers, planners, whatever gifts we've been born with, whatever deficits we've been born with, and to transform those so that we actually manifest another being. We're born into the world in one way, and we take God's inspiration and God's plan for us, and we work on it with all of our will and all of our thoughtfulness, and we transform ourselves in that process to manifest God's blessing in the world in a different way. And I think that at a high level, and I understand I'm moving far away from the literal story of the text, at a high level, that is what makes this story so incredibly powerful and makes Yaakov, Jacob, such an important figure to us. Jacob, who will become Yisrael, so by whom we name ourselves, by the people Israel, comes from the name that he will eventually earn for himself. He represents this capacity for us each to transform ourselves by insisting that we can remake ourselves in the vision of who we must become and not simply the person we are. He represents the ought in a world of is. And in that sense, he can inspire us and guide us to constantly move forward and to be reaching for new possibilities. All the best. Talk to you soon.